Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori. Today we are going to be talking about the books that I read in February of 2025. Would you like to come and say hello? Say hello. He's very warm. He was sleeping in the windowsill in the sun. And so he is very kind of groggy and warm. Do you have anything you would like to say? Put me down, please. So I started off the month with another murder mystery and thriller book that I have had on my list for a while since I started looking into that genre and figuring out which book sounded the most interesting. And that is We Begin at the End by Chris Whitaker. Now there's another book by Chris Whitaker that I have been recommended by multiple people called All the Colors of the Dark, which I still very much intend to read because the synopsis of that book, you guys should go read it, because it sounds absolutely incredible and I cannot wait. This one is kind of hard to explain a little bit. It's the story of a young girl named Duchess who's being raised by a mother who's an addict. She has her little brother and she's basically the adult of the family and trying to keep everything glued together. And then the other main character that we follow is a sheriff who is in the town that Duchess lives in, and he has known her mother for a really long time, and he kind of looks after everybody. It's a very small town murder mystery plot line, and the main characters are a cool contrast. There's almost a twist on, if I were to go into fantasy tropes a little bit, there's almost like a lone wolf and cub vibe from them, even though they're only connected for bits and pieces of the story. A man comes back from jail who was convicted of a murder years and years ago when the sheriff was a teenage boy, and this man that is released from jail is his best friend. And he was partially instrumental in making sure that his best friend got put in jail for the murder years and years ago. So there's a lot of things going on in this book, and I really liked the atmosphere of this book a lot. I think that the small town vibes that Chris Whitaker pulls off in this book are very strong. I really liked that aspect of it. And I liked the sheriff character a lot. The teenage girl character of Duchess, I liked aspects of her. I think that there were some really cool moments. I think that there's a lot there that talks about children being forced into adulthood too early and the consequences and cost of that, especially when they are stuck in a world that is really not healthy or safe or secure for them to grow up in. And the responsibility that Duchess carries trying to not only look after herself, but also her younger brother. And when the murder happens in this book and all of these characters are tied into it and everything kind of explodes, it goes in a couple directions that I wasn't anticipating necessarily. And again, I think there's some really cool twists in here. But what ultimately kept this book lower as in terms of the rating for me was I felt like the character work was a little bit caricatured and weak in several spots, and especially with the teenage girl character of Duchess. I don't know. I think there's a very fine line between giving children the credit they are due in terms of how they think and how they respond to things, because oftentimes authors will go the opposite way and make children a lot dumber than they actually are, which I don't like either. But in this case, I felt like she was more a caricatured ideal. Duchess kind of ended up being just a vehicle for the author to have deep and insightful reflective thoughts about life and humanity that I felt like didn't match the character sometimes. So yeah, I wouldn't not recommend this book. I personally wasn't like blown away by it. I had a good time with it and I binged it very quickly. But overall it was like a roughly 3-star read for me, and I don't know that I would go back and reread it, so take from that what you will. But again, another foray into the murder mystery and thriller genre that I have been really enjoying, and this one like I said, was definitely very bingeable, so I really appreciated that about it. Next up, staying in the murder mystery and thriller genre, I went for a translated book called Malice, which is book 1 in the Detective Kaga mysteries by Kiego Higashino. And I really had a good time with this book, you guys. This one was more of a why done it than a who done it. And I really, really liked that aspect of it. I wasn't bothered by the fact that we kind of narrowed down the suspect pool pretty quickly in the beginning of the book. We have an author who is widely known and beloved for his novels, who is found dead in his home right before he was planning on moving overseas. And he was found by his wife and his best friend, who supposedly have rock-solid alibis. Or do they? The whole book just kind of slowly peels back, well, it could have been this, and it could have gone this way, and what if it looked like this, and maybe this could have been a motive. And it's kind of cool because we get a flip-flop back and forth in perspective between the detective himself, who we don't meet until a little bit later, and also one of the suspects involved in the overall murder investigation. The number of times this book had me second guessing everything. I'm not the type of reader who wants to try to figure out who did it. Like, I kind of work on that subconsciously a little bit as I'm reading. I'm completely fine with letting the story reveal itself as it goes and just being like surprised or not by what happens at the end. And this one was so interesting, and it really twisted and turned in a lot of ways. And I think at the heart, this book is not only a murder mystery, but it is a character exploration. And I think that's really what I loved about it, because it really digs deeply into the character of one of the suspects. What really struck me about it is a completely new appreciation for how hard of a job detectives and officers who investigate crime have on their hands, because when you're getting multiple versions of the same story and there's all of these clues and pieces of evidence that you're trying to put together, it's really a mind trip. And I think this book really captured that incredibly well. The ending was a little rushed for me and a little bit info dumpy, but honestly, I had a really good time with this book. And I think going into it with the expectation that it isn't a big mysterious reveal of a whodunit is gonna make you enjoy it a lot more, and just settle in for the character analysis, honestly, because I really enjoyed this. Next up, the read for the month in my Discord was The Curse of Chalion by Lois McMaster Bujold. This is a book that my friend Andrew Meredith has been bugging me to read for at least 1.5 or 2 years now, and this goes right along with my Cosmic Footsteps project, where I am reading a bunch of older fantasy novels written by women in the SFF genres. And I gotta say, you guys, I'm shocked that Lois McMaster Bujold is not talked about more in our booktube sphere. I'm really shocked by that, because this is so good. This is so good, you guys. This book has a very historical Spanish influence to it. And our main protagonist, Kazaril, is really everything so many of us want and love out of our heroic kind of mentor figures in fantasy. He's not a perfect character, but he's such a fabulous narrator for this book, and getting that kind of coming of age young hero story from the perspective of the mentor is something I always really love, and I think it's a great twist on the chosen one trope. But this book essentially takes the idea that what if all of the things that people believed about magic and illness and supernatural beings in the medieval ages was true. So you have the humors, you have like the idea of demons and how, like, it's so interesting, the magic system in this book. There's death magic, which we are introduced to very early on in the story, and it's darker than I was anticipating it being, but it's not as dark as a lot of other series that I've read. I think it's got a really interesting balance between the lighthearted moments, and there are so many great human moments in this book, and then you go down and have these really dark horrific moments. But overall, the heart of this story is so vibrant and the characters are so interesting. The tension throughout this book, brilliant masterclass on the ability to slowly ramp up tension at a very even pace through the entire novel. I was incredibly impressed by that. The atmosphere of her world building, like the balance of this book is just so good between the characters, the plot, the world building, the magic system. I think she balanced all of that really evenly, and that just impressed me to no end as I was reading it. I did have a couple of hiccups with the plot line, but she ended up working them out in a way that I was actually pretty happy with. You have this dark curse settled over a royal family, and this man who is broken, and he's a veteran, and he's been through a whole lot of horrible things, and he comes home dragging himself into the place where he grew up, just wanting to have a quiet life where he can rest and retire, and he gets swept up into this incredibly tense just den of political intrigue and the hovering threat of a very dark curse on the people that he's sworn to protect, and it is just so incredibly good. So if you've been waiting to put Bujold on your TBR, or she's already on your TBR and you haven't read her yet, please do so, because honestly, this is really, really good, you guys. Beautiful prose. Some of the best prose I've read in a long time, but yet still very accessible, which I love. It's not hard to read. But yeah, this is a really excellent book. I'm looking forward to Paladin of Souls, which is book 2 in the series. The nice part about this as well, I should mention, is that Curse of Chalion is technically a standalone. So are the other 2 books in the trilogy. They're just in the same world with some of similar characters as the ones that we meet in the first book. There's a side character that takes the protagonist spot in book 2. But it is a standalone, so you can read it by itself. You don't have to keep going in the series right away to finish the story, and it's brilliant. It's a really, really good book, you guys. Stamp of approval from me, for sure. Let's talk about the final book that I finished this month, and this is one I've been reading since, I think, the beginning of January, second week of January, and this is continuing my reread and then read of The Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steve Erickson. I finished Memories of Ice. You guys, this is a chonk. This is a chonker of a book. And I don't know if it's just the trade paperback version or what, because I know this isn't the longest Malazan book, but it is the thickest trade paperback of the series on my shelf. So Memories of Ice just continued to remind me why Malazan blew my mind when I read it so many years ago the first time, and why it inspired me so much to expand and continue my journey into epic fantasy as an author, because Erickson has done something absolutely unique and singular with this series, and it blows my mind still 10 years later, and I already know a lot of what's happening in the book because I've read it before. Memories of Ice, spoiler free. I'm gonna do a more deep dive for those of you that have read it shortly. That's the plan anyway. Book 3 really takes an already vast and expansive world and just blows it wide open in so many ways. The amount of lore and history and reveals that we get in this book just is monumental compared to the first 2, in my opinion. I know that Memories of Ice is a lot of people's favorite in the series. I love it because of a lot of the character moments that happen in here. There's some incredible character moments in this book that still to this day, like, I've kind of held with me and just kind of live rent-free in my head, and getting to read them again was such a cool experience. But I do think that my original opinion of liking Dead House Gates, book 2, more than this one still stands for multiple reasons. First, the first probably third to half of this book is very slow. And the amount of information and lore and history that we get in the beginning is just a lot. Like, it's a lot. And I know for a lot of people it's the complete opposite experience, where Dead House Gates feels more meandery in terms of plot. But for me, it was definitely this one. And there's so many things, you guys. I don't even know how to give you an idea of my thoughts without going into serious spoilers, so I'm going to keep it pretty light for now. But one of the things I do want to say about Malazan is, even with the amount of information we're given in this series and the amount of world building and history and things that are in this, I still want to really encourage people that I think there's too much of a focus in the community on this series being the hardest thing you'll ever read, or the most intimidating series of all time, or like, that's so hard. It's complicated. It is complex. It is layered. It is dense. But I don't agree with the overemphasis on how impossible this series is to read. I am not the best at putting details together and remembering details, and I still have just been having the best time with this series. I had a fantastic time the first time I read it, so it is I don't agree also with people that say you have to reread Malazan to get anything out of it. Absolutely untrue. My reread of these books has been a very enriching experience, but I absolutely loved them the first time I read them, and I think a lot of it is just learning to immerse in the story and let go and not feel like you have to figure everything else out right this minute. Just go with it, find your characters, and sink into the grind of what they're going through. And just the prose in this and the themes in Malazan are just so powerful, and there's so many moments where you have to stop and just let a paragraph or a quote just kind of sink in and sit with it for a while, and I love that about it. It is such a rich experience, and that's what I hope to encourage other people to try out. But this concludes my third book in my reread, moving up to the continuation of Malazan Book of the Fallen, and the only one I have left to reread is House of Chains, and then I will officially be reading a brand new to me Malazan book, which I'm very excited about. I can't wait. I'm so glad that I came back to this series when I did, because it's just been, I love it so much. It's so brilliant. The character arcs are just incredible, and I am consistently so inspired by this series to build bigger and dig deeper and really fall more and more in love with epic fantasy as a genre, both as a reader and a writer. I also need to talk about the one DNF that I had in February, because I'm trying to get better about remembering to do that on my wrap-ups. But this one I started and got about 50% into, 40 to 50% into, and put it down because I have a lot of thoughts about this one. And that is Mushroom Blues by Adrian M. Gibson. This one is kind of a dark detective noir story, and it's fantasy. Kind of. The fantasy elements in terms of the planet that is very based on different mushrooms and like has a very, very strong otherworldly vibe to it is a pretty backseat element to this story, which kind of disappointed me a little bit, because I think that was such a like weird and unique take to go for with a fantasy world. And in this story, it tackles a lot of really big and heavy themes, but what ultimately made me put it down is I really appreciate when books handle themes in a way that allows the reader to immerse into the story, to establish a footing in the world and with the characters, to build a relationship with the characters, and then reflect on the themes and really have them be impactful. I didn't find a lot of subtlety here, and that's something that was kind of off-putting to me. I think the characters especially had a lot of potential, but I just didn't find them to be engaging, because it seemed more like they were there to carry the themes as opposed to be, you know, layered and interesting characters in and of themselves, if that makes any sense. So this one I got about 40 to 50% in. I may continue and finish the story at some point, but at this point, I just don't know that it's going to be something I go back to at the moment. I do think that there's, like I said, the world building of this story and the author bringing their interest and nerdiness about mushrooms and fungi is actually a really unique and interesting take for a fantasy foundation, and I love that aspect of it, and I just wish that it had been given a little bit more space to breathe outside of the very heavily center staged themes that kind of felt like they took over everything else in the story. That's my thought. That was my one DNF for the month of February. The only other things I wanted to mention in this wrap up is that I rewatched season 1 of The Big Bang Theory this month because I needed something a little bit lighter hearted. I needed some comedy. I haven't laughed that much at a TV show probably since the last time I watched Big Bang Theory, and what a show, honestly. I had so much fun rewatching it. It was amazing. And I do intend to keep going. I think when I watched it the first time, I stopped around season 7 or 8. And so I'm looking forward to getting back in with the gang and maybe finishing the series this year. We'll see. So that's what I've been up to in the month of February. I would love to know from you guys what you read in February, what your book of the month was. I'm going to have to give my book of the month to The Curse of Chalion because I don't usually do book of the month or book of the year as books that I've reread. So Memories of Ice is off the table for that. And Curse of Chalion, honestly, is well deserving of a book of the month spot, and I really would encourage you guys to check out Bujold's writing. I know she's also written a sci-fi series, Vorkosigan Saga, I think, something close to that I'm also looking at checking out in the near future because her writing is really superb, and I think that she needs to be talked about on BookTube a lot more than she is. So with no further ado, I hope you guys are having a great week. I hope you are reading some 5-star reads, and I'll see you in the next video.